He's prepared to use every element of American power to stop drugs from flooding into our country and to bring those responsible to justice. The Maduro regime is not the legitimate government of Venezuela. It is a narco-terror cartel.
Fusiles y misiles para la fuerza campesina, para defender el territorio, la soberanía y la paz de Venezuela.
Almost overnight. That's how things stand between the United States and Venezuela. Donald Trump has already deployed at least 3 destroyers in the Caribbean in a show of naval force not seen in this region for many years. The objective, according to them, to combat drug trafficking and prevent cartels from operating in these waters. The target in particular is the Cartel of the Suns, led, according to the US government, by Nicolas Maduro himself. There is also a $50 million reward for anyone who helps put him behind bars. He's primarily accused of flooding the United States with all kinds of drugs. The vessels we're talking about are 3 veritable beasts of the Arleigh Burke class, equipped with guided missile systems, including the well-known Tomahawk, and fitted with the Aegis air defense system capable of shooting down everything from aircraft to ballistic missiles. They are authentic intelligence, surveillance, and precision strike platforms, and pay attention because they are not coming alone. They're accompanied by a fleet that currently totals at least 6 ships and some 4,000 Marines ready for whatever is necessary. All this, they say, is to fight Latin American drug trafficking, but obviously the size of the contingent has raised a question. Was such a deployment really necessary for that? Keep in mind that the last 2 times Washington flexed its military muscle in the region were during Operation Just Cause, the US invasion of Panama in 1989, and we all remember how that ended, with Manuel Noriega behind bars in a Miami prison. Then again in 1994, when under Operation Uphold Democracy, the United States deployed some 25,000 troops in 2 aircraft carriers to intervene in Haiti. So not surprisingly, this latest action has put dictator Maduro on high alert.
Nuestros mares, nuestro cielo y nuestras tierras las defendemos nosotros, las liberamos nosotros, las vigilamos y las patrullamos nosotros. Ningún imperio va a venir a tocar suelo sagrado de Venezuela.
In recent hours, Maduro has announced, in his typical bravado tone, a plan to mobilize no less than 4.5 million militiamen throughout the country. This militia was created by Hugo Chavez in 2005 and is part of the Bolivarian National Armed Forces, but in practice, it's nothing more than a group of retired peasants armed with rifles in exchange for a couple of extra bags of rice in their clap food tracks. And of course, between untrained soldiers, civilians in disguise, and Maduro's inflammatory statements, there is already a sense of fear in Caracas, which is exactly what Donald Trump was likely hoping for with this sudden deployment. VisualPolitik community, we could be looking at a simple Trumpist propaganda stunt. Or it could be that this time, things are serious. What if the United States really does have a plan for Venezuela? What if Trump is willing to use this naval force in some way? And no, I'm not talking about invading the country. In fact, military experts have already warned that, although the deployment is considerable, it is still far too small to see US troops entering the country. Not to mention that a troop deployment doesn't seem to fit in with MAGA's identity at all. Now, no one has a crystal ball, but let's be honest, seeing Marines in Caracas still sounds like science fiction right now. But hold on a minute, because that doesn't mean the story ends here. Far from it. The objective of this huge operation may be very different. It may correspond to another type of plan, a plan with several alternatives that could change the history of Venezuela. And given the information we have, that's exactly what we want to talk about in this video. Are we really looking at an operation against the Chavista narco mafia, or are we seeing the prologue to something much bigger? What if what we're witnessing is the prelude to a secret plan to overthrow Nicolas Maduro? What if those 6 ships are not only coming to monitor cocaine shipments, but to carry out an operation against the regime? We'll pay close attention because the largest concentration of US military power in Latin America in decades may not be merely accidental. Before we dive in, let me ask you, how often do you actually feel safe online? Because here's the truth. Going incognito doesn't really make you invisible. Your internet provider, your workplace, even your home Wi-Fi router, all of them can still track everything you do. That's where CyberGhost VPN comes in, the sponsor of today's video. And it's not just any VPN. CyberGhost is one of the most trusted VPNs out there, with over 38 million users worldwide and more than 20,000 glowing reviews on Trustpilot. It hides your IP address and encrypts your data, so your browsing stays solely your business. Even CyberGhost doesn't keep logs of what you're doing. It's super easy to use. Just pick a location, they have over 100 available, turn it on, and you're protected. You can even unlock content that's not available in your country from over 40 platforms like Netflix, Amazon Prime, and Disney+. Traveling or working remotely, CyberGhost also helps you avoid sketchy public Wi-Fi risks, and even score better deals online by changing your virtual location. It works on pretty much everything: phones, laptops, tablets, even your smart TV and console. And one subscription covers up to 7 devices, so it's perfect for sharing. The best part, right now with the link in the description, you'll get a whopping 84% off, just $2.03 a month, and 4 extra months free. It's risk-free too, with a 45-day money-back guarantee, so there's nothing to lose. Go ahead, protect your digital life. Click the link, try CyberGhost, and stay one step ahead online.
Trump's options.
Let's be honest, the deployment of US forces that we're seeing has taken almost everyone by surprise, starting with the bigwigs in Miraflores and Fuerte Tiuna, who simply did not see it coming, particularly when we consider that this threat is accompanied by other news that, at first glance, makes no sense in a scenario like this. Take a look.
U.S. resumes imports of Venezuelan oil under new license to Chevron.
Because of things like this, many believe that what Trump is doing is nothing more than a bluff to make the Chavistas nervous and prove who is the big kid in the playground. But let me say it again. What if this is nothing more than a few ships sailing around and that's it? Is there any chance that the United States could carry out some kind of operation? Well, let's review all the possible scenarios that could be in play right now. This is an outline of what could happen in the Caribbean waters in the coming weeks, from least to most likely. And for many, despite everything, this still seems to be the most likely option. Okay, yes, I know, it's the least exciting and undramatic of all the options, but at the same time, it remains the most likely that absolutely nothing happens. In other words, this fleet is simply taking a stroll to contain the drug traffickers, divert media attention, put pressure on the cartels to reduce shipments, carry out some operation or detection for the media, and, while they're at it, make the Bolivarian leaders nervous so that they agree to more demands from Washington. In fact, this is not the first time the US has done something like this. Perhaps not with such a large deployment, but in 2020, destroyers were also sent to patrol these waters. Now, why would the Trump administration do something like this? Well, logically, it's not to prevent their ships from rusting in the docks, not at all. With this show of force, Trump could be seeking to make a dramatic statement, a warning to the Chavista regime, while without actually triggering any real tension. It would be something like saying, watch out, look where we are. Either you make an effort to prevent drugs leaving Venezuela from ending up in the United States, or in future, those ships will fire missiles for real.
Missiles that could end up taking out drug-related facilities in Venezuela, or even the Venezuelan army and regime itself. Because remember that the Cartel of the Suns is an organization comprised of members of the Bolivarian National Armed Forces itself.
And of course, according to the definitions being made in Washington, there's no clear difference between drug traffickers, the military, and the Venezuelan state. So in this way, the ultimate goal would simply be to sit off their coast with a fleet and send a message to the world that Trump is serious about his fight against drug trafficking in Venezuela, that he will attack the bad guys, and yes, that if the drug shipments don't stop, the regime and its collaborators will face the consequences. In short, a mere show of effect with no intention of going any further. Now, this is only one possibility, but it's also possible that Trump will actually use this military force. In fact, he already did so recently in Iran. Remember? I'm sure you do. And this is where the real game begins, the part of this video where all the action is going to take place. Because using this force doesn't necessarily mean firing missiles at Miraflores and eliminating Maduro and his henchmen, as many are hoping. There are several ways to do this, several paths that seem to be under consideration right now in the Pentagon and the White House, and with which key objectives could be achieved. Pay attention to what we're about to tell you, because this may be the key to this entire story. From least to most likely, these could be the most probable paths if Trump finally decides to use the force deployed in the Caribbean. Chess Grandmaster Karpov was famous for his positional, suffocating style of play. He did not seek a quick checkmate, but rather to squeeze his opponent until they had no way out. And that is what the Americans could be doing now to obtain concessions in a much more active way. That is, by greatly raising the tension and putting forward a kind of clear ultimatum. In this way, Trump could achieve a double victory, one political and one diplomatic, with a greater military presence in the Caribbean. The idea could be to bring Maduro back to the negotiating table with the United States so that the Venezuelan dictator commits to collaborating much more with Washington on the issues that really concern the North, on the banks of the Potomac. Because let's be clear, if any of you think that Trump, or anyone else in the United States, is really concerned about dictatorship, repression, and Venezuela's internal problems, wake up and smell the coffee. Uncle Sam isn't going to lift a finger to save Venezuelans from their agony, nor the Syrians, nor the Ukrainians, nor anyone else. If he does, it will only ever be for his own interests. Remember, make America great again. So the question is, what would those interests be? Well, the Karpov strategy would basically consist of moving these pieces, these bishops, rooks, and knights of the sea that are the destroyers and landing vessels, in order to get many more concessions from Maduro. Not to seek to overthrow the regime, but to bring it to its knees. But why? Well, first of all, to force them to accept many more Venezuelan immigrants deported from the United States. As we've said many times here on VisualPolitik, the rate of illegal immigrant arrests is going very well, but the same cannot be said for deportation. Immigrants are currently piling up in detention centres, awaiting deportation orders from judges, and there's no longer room for everyone. This explains things like the opening of the Alligator Alcatraz Immigrant Centre, or even the use of Guantanamo to house illegal immigrants. So Trump could be looking to ramp up the pressure on Maduro to accept many more flights and many more people without complaint. And pay attention, because this is only the beginning. Secondly, it could also be a way of pressuring Chavismo to release more political prisoners, which would allow the president to score an important political victory, especially with Hispanic voters. We'll explain why this is so important in more detail in a moment. And then there's also a third option, which would be to force Maduro to arrest and hand over drug lords to the United States to be tried and imprisoned there. Any of these three options would give Trump a huge political boost at a time when his popularity is at its lowest point in his second term.
Trump approval holds at 40%, lowest level of his term.
So bizarre as it may seem, Venezuela could play a key role in improving those figures somewhat. Oh, and let's not forget the diplomatic dimension of a naval deployment along this region, especially for Russia. Because maintaining this fleet off the Venezuelan coast could also serve as a nudge to the egos of the Cuban dictatorship of Diaz-Canel and even Vladimir Putin himself. It would be a way of saying, don't be so confident in this region, because this is my backyard, and I'll do whatever I want in it. I don't care if these are your allies. It could even serve as a small coup against Putin in the context of crucial negotiations on the war in Ukraine, although in truth, this is perhaps the least important reason. Now, what if Trump really did want to bring about change in the Venezuelan regime, and not just have them eating out of his hand in the way we've just described? Well, this is another possibility that is being considered, and, to be honest, it doesn't seem so far-fetched. And this brings us to the next possible strategy. There's also the possibility that Trump really wants to force changes in the Venezuelan regime, above all, to appease his Hispanic voter base and get something off his chest. A base that, let's not forget, was absolutely crucial to his victory in the last presidential election. Now, what on earth is this Bolton strategy? Well, we've named it after his former national security advisor, John Bolton, who served with Trump during his first term. For Bolton, the United States does not even need to resort to conventional military intervention to bring about change. All it needs to do is turn up the heat until the pot explodes. Let me explain. This military move, along with CIA operations and coercive phone calls, could make a lot of people really nervous. In this way, by applying sufficient pressure and coercive measures, along with the promises of redemption, the United States could force changes within the regime. In other words, a self-coup. It will go something like, get rid of Maduro and Diosdado, or you'll all end up badly. If the threat is credible, it could work miracles, because this is basically a narco-criminal regime. Many could seriously consider making a move to preserve their business and their money. And if Maduro is the obstacle, Maduro could be the one to pay the price. And Trump could sell the line that he has overthrown the dictator, and probably also that he's achieved some political reform or secured an agreement on elections that are somewhat more democratic, even if Chavismo continues to operate with impunity in practice. Now, let's move up the ladder of aggression that Trump could potentially use. Keep in mind, however, that the more aggressive the option, the less likely it is to be the strategy ultimately chosen. But whatever the case, this is how we arrive at the next alternative. The Reagan strategy. But what on earth does it consist of, and why is it called that? Well, you see, it has to do with the attack Ronald Reagan carried out in Libya in April 1986. I'm referring to Operation El Dorado Canyon. At that time, the US government accused the Libyan regime of being behind a terrorist attack on the La Belle discotheque in West Berlin. An attack that left 3 dead and 200 wounded. The thing is, of the 3 people who died, 2 were US military personnel. So what does this have to do with Maduro? Well, as far as we know, Chavismo isn't going around planting bombs, so this isn't about the causes being similar, but rather the means. Because in response to the Berlin attack, Reagan attacked military barracks, airports, command centers in Tripoli and Benghazi, and also one of the residencies of the then dictator Gaddafi. In other words, the attack did not seek regime change directly, but it did force the Libyan government to completely change its way of doing things. Applied to Venezuela, this could mean attacks on Venezuelan drug production and logistics centers, Chavista army barracks, or civilian facilities of little importance to the regime. This is somewhat similar to when Trump bombed Iran's nuclear facilities in June without seeking to force regime change. In other words, to strike a blow against Maduro so that Chavistas really fear Uncle Sam and begin to collaborate with Washington, reduce drug trafficking, release political prisoners, end torture in prisons, and even organize new elections or a transition, or simply to send a message to the Hispanic world. Trump is going after these guys with a vengeance. And we're not done yet. There's still one more possibility. The last of the possible strategies that seem to be on the table. Any ideas? Well, pay attention to this other possibility. On the 3rd of January 2020, during his first term, President Donald Trump executed one of the most important figures in the Iranian regime, Qasem Soleimani, with a drone and insane precision. Trump took out the then commander of the Iranian Quds Force, the Revolutionary Guard division specializing in asymmetric warfare and military intelligence operations. It was a brutal blow from which Iran has still not recovered. Nothing has been the same since this execution, because Soleimani was the real tough guy, the guy who pulled the strings of intelligence and military action in the Persian country. Well, in the most extreme case, this type of deployment of force would allow Trump to do something similar with a key figure in Chavismo, perhaps Diosdado Cabello, perhaps Vladimir Badrino, or perhaps Maduro himself. And what could they achieve by doing so? Well, this type of operation is usually carried out for 2 reasons. Either to force a profound change of faces in the regime, or even to bring about the fall of the regime itself due to the internal instability that could be unleashed. In other words, this action could cause a general stampede among the army's high command and Chavista institutions, while giving the opposition a free hand at the same time. Or, in the worst case scenario, if regime change is not achieved, it could lead to the successor of these individuals saying, "I'll behave better." At present, this does not seem the most likely option, but there is no doubt that this is a scenario that is being considered. Now, I'm sure many of you are thinking, but come on Josh, why on earth would Trump complicate his life with the Chavista regime? Is he really that interested in doing something about Venezuela? Well, the truth is that he might be. Even opting for one of the lighter pressure strategies we just mentioned could be a real boost for MAGA. Because, as we mentioned earlier, the midterms are just around the corner. And Trump needs to get to November 2026 with better results, especially if the economy falters or he doesn't achieve peace in Ukraine soon. His popularity is currently at a low point, around 40%, and Venezuela could be one of the cards he plays to win back Hispanic voters, who lately seem to be turning their backs on him en masse. And if you don't believe me, take a look at this news item.
About 1/3 of Hispanic respondents, 32%, said they approved of Trump's job performance.
Only 32%, 14 points less than in the 2024 elections. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of thousands, millions of potential votes for Republicans that are now up in the air, a number that could be enough to make a difference in the midterms. So Trump could be looking to win back these voters by attacking what they hate most, the regimes that condemned them to poverty and forced them to leave their country, whether it's Cuba, or in this case, Venezuela. So yes, the president does have reasons to take action, whatever it may be, but something taking advantage of this military deployment. Now, what if I told you that things are already happening in Venezuela that might explain why Maduro seems so nervous in his latest press conferences? Would you like to know exactly what we're talking about? Well, listen up.
Caracas nerves.
The storm brewing over Miraflores looks like the biggest the dictator has had to face in his more than 12 years in power. Even though they haven't done anything yet, the American destroyers are already having their first effects in Venezuela. Diosdado Cabello, Chavismo's eternal squire and vice president of the all-powerful United Socialist Party of Venezuela, came out a few days ago to denounce what he called a terrorist plot against Maduro.
Diosdado Cabello announced the seizure of an arsenal in Miranda and accused Maria Corina Machado.
The evidence, well, the usual evidence provided in Caracas. They showed on television an alleged arsenal that included 23 sniper rifles of various calibers, 2 shotguns, an automatic weapon, ammunition, and lead ingots. And this is where the nerves start to show. Because beyond the lead ingots and rusty shotguns, there are rumors that something is stirring within the regime itself, and Maduro knows it.
Gracias, pero tu debilidad no será mi debilidad, porque yo no soy chantajeable, yo lo que voy es pa'lante. Y hay mucho cobarde escondido y disfrazado que no es capaz de decirme las cosas en la cara.
There is talk of betrayal, of officers who no longer trust Maduro, and of officials who, with their backs against the wall, are looking to save their own skins before it's too late. According to some leaks, a group of high-ranking military officials has begun to meet in secret. They allegedly used encrypted channels, such as Signal, to coordinate without raising suspicion. They are known as the Rebel Hawks, more than 20 high-ranking officers with stripes on their sleeves, and a very clear idea in their heads. Nicolas Maduro can no longer hold onto power. In fact, Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez has already seen the writing on the wall and is reportedly preparing an internal purge in the armed forces. Now, we don't know for sure if this is true or not. We've seen stories like this in Venezuela for years, and Chavismo still exists. But what is true is that these kinds of military movements serve to instill a certain paranoia and make the bigwigs distrust each other. And that, with these guys, is an excellent sign. In fact, a recent move by Maduro gives even more clues as to the mood in Caracas right now. Nerves, nerves, and more nerves.
Venezuela's Maduro bans use of drones as tensions over deployment of U.S. warships escalate. The drone ban coincides with heightened U.S. military activity in the region, as 3 guided missile destroyers are reportedly being deployed near Venezuelan waters.
The regime has just banned not only the use of drones, but also their purchase, sale, import, manufacture, distribution, and even training in their use. Basically, Caracas has declared war on anything that flies without a pilot. And you may be wondering, Why? Well, according to some sources, Chavismo believes that preparations are underway for an operation against them that could involve up to 36 drones loaded with explosives. Drones that could be hidden in truck containers strategically located near the Miraflores Palace and Maiquetía International Airport. Sounds familiar, right? Essentially, it's a plan very similar to Operation Spiderweb, which Ukraine carried out on the 1st of June against Russian bases. In the end, nothing may come of all this, or Trump may take advantage of the situation to strike Maduro with one of the strategies we have outlined. But what is clear is that there is nervousness within Chavismo, and this must be exploited. Will all this lead to the fall of the regime? Well, probably not, but what it could achieve, if Trump wants it, is a new type of relationship with Caracas. One in which the United States says something and Caracas complies without so much revolutionary rhetoric. That would be a small step forward at least. Now, while we keep an eye on what happens, the questions are for you. Do you think Trump will end up doing any of the things that we've just told you about, or is he just shoving off? Well, leave your opinions below in the comments and let's kick off the debate. And very importantly, if you like this video, give it a like and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't done so already. And once again, a big thank you to CyberGhost for sponsoring this video. For just $2.03 a month, you get full protection for your data and unrestricted access to blocked content around the world. Remember, you can try it completely risk-free thanks to their 45-day money-back guarantee. And by signing up, you're also helping support our content. Click the link in the description below. As always, thank you so very much for being there. All the best. See you next time.